Hey everybody, I'm Rob Childs, a Rapier swordsman out of the United States, and today's video is sparked by a question that I received from a student of my school asking what ripostes are available from the 9 parries I use in my system. Now, even as this student was asking the question, I realized that before I could really do a video answering that question, it would behoove me to actually do a video describing what the 9 parries are in my system. So that is what I'm going to be talking about with you today. Now do keep in mind that the 9 parries that I use, I did not invent. These are parries that I have pulled from a body of knowledge, different schools of thought that I have encountered across my travels and over my time perfecting my art. Now of course, amongst these 9 parries, there are going to be some that I use more than others because, let's face it, fencing is a dialogue, and that dialogue can go in any number of directions, but mostly it has a tendency to follow some very recognizable patterns. So what I'm going to do is cover down on those 4 basic, most commonly used parries in my system. And that is going to be the parries of 6, 4, 7, and 8. Now parry 6, as you can see by the picture, utilizes a straight line from the sword all the way down through the arm. The pommel of the sword itself is actually touching the wrist very lightly, and the point of the sword is resting on what I call my opponent's third eye. If your opponent had a third eye right at the top of the middle of their forehead, that's where my point on the level is resting with. That forms a line straight down through the sword that extends as a straight line down through my arm, and my elbow is pointing outside the line of my body. This creates a guide, if you will. When I parry my opponent and they land on my sword, it moves them to the outside line of my body, which is away from all the soft fleshy stuff that I would like to keep in one piece. Parry 4 parries on the left side of my body. And as you can see, it doesn't form a straight line from the sword down through my arm. That is by necessity because obviously my arm is on the right side of my body and the parry is on to the left. But it still follows the same concept in that the tip stays on the line of my opponent's third eye and extends down past the outside line of my body. Every time I parry my opponent in that 4 and I catch their sword, it guides them just outside of my body. Now do keep note, it's important to recognize that when I parry in such a fashion that my opponent just misses me. Oftentimes you're going to see your opponents, and you might even do this yourself, when you do that parry that is unexpected, you'll parry and extend that sword well outside the line of your body. This is a flaw, in my opinion, because of the amount of distance that you cover that is unnecessary, and then of course once you get there, all of that distance that you have to come back in order to threaten your opponent. This is distance which is equal to time times 2 that you are wasting and giving to your opponent. Now moving on to the other 2 most common parries that I use. Parry 7. Now again, like parry 6, it's a straight line from the sword up through the arm with the tip this time resting at the level of my opponent's knees. The sword then reaches up, straight line through my arm, which then leads that straight line outside the line of my body. This ensures that when I parry my opponent low, that their sword is guided just outside the line of my body, missing me by inches, if not less. The 4th and final of the 4 most common parries is parry 8. Now parry 8 is on the left side of my body, and like 4, it is not forming a line from the sword through my arm. It is instead, like parry 7, the point is resting at the level of my opponent's knees. It creates a guide that leads just outside the line of my body because I want my opponent to miss by inches, not by feet. Next up is going to be the less often used parries, but still very important because the conversation of fencing can oftentimes lead into new and interesting ways in the midst of the bout. So the first of these lesser used parries is parry 1. Now parry 1 is a great sweeping parry that covers the entire left side of the body. You drop the tip low, swing the arm up high, and as you are moving it to the left side of your body, you create a wall that is impenetrable to any cutting attack, and also too, if you're scooping up your opponent's thrust, it makes it very, very difficult for them to redirect or perform a remise or even a follow-on attack just because of the amount of time it takes to have to reorient the sword. Parry 1 is a very effective wall technique. Then comes parry 2. Now parry 2 covers the high line, but unlike a lot of parries that you have seen which moves horizontally in front of the body, parry 2 is more of a between you and your opponent type of vector, right? It is still covering that high line in terms of the forte is directly over your head. However, it is different from some parries you might use to block a direct cut to your head, in that this is most effective in scooping up the thrust of your opponent and then immediately redirecting it into their head. Next up is parry 3. Now this guards the right side of the body, and it is very similar to parry 6, except for the distance out from your body in which it resides. Parry 3 is designed for those attacks that, for whatever reason, you and your opponent got a little too close to each other, and doing a parry 6 just isn't feasible because there's not enough room between the two of you to do it effectively. Or maybe they just simply got close enough that if you were to do a parry 6, it would push your sword onto their forte, which is obviously a bad situation to be in. Parry 3 is very effective at gaining control of your opponent's weapon when you are too close together, and then giving you the advantage by opening up opportunities for riposte. Parry 4, we already discussed, so I'm going to move straight on to parry 5. Now parry 5 is like that parry that I was describing earlier. It's similar to the 2 in that it is covering a high line, but this time it is mostly effective at stopping a cut that's coming down on your head. Parry 5 is something that I took from, again, Olympic saber, Russo-Hungarian style to be specific, and I have found that it is very effective also in rapier when you've got an opponent that likes to cut. Parry 6, 7, and 8 we talked about as 3 of the 4 most common parries, so that brings us then to parry 9. Parry 9 is very much like parry 5 in that it covers a high line, but it is different in that you're not laying it horizontally as a line directly over your head. Instead, you're going to have it canted, and this cant brings the sword of your opponent, wherever it strikes along the length of your blade, down onto the forte, and from there you can do some really nasty things that I'll be talking about in the next video, where I cover the ripostes that are available from each of these different parries. If you have any questions about these parries, I can tell you first and foremost, feel free to go ahead and leave your comments and questions down in the YouTube comments section here on this channel, but also too, my upcoming book, Revelations of Rapier, which is going to be coming out in the first quarter of 2022, will be out, and you're going to see a full explanation of all of these parries and so much more knowledge beyond that very soon.